Hello, it's Lauren from Marine History. I finally have another tutorial for you. Yay! This is a tutorial for 135, the mid-1930s two-piece dress and cape. This is a blouse, a skirt, and a cape. It looks like a suit, but it's really not. Pretty exciting. So, the back of the skirt has these really interesting box pleats, and a few of you said that it looked somewhat intimidating to make the box pleats. So I thought I would do this tutorial that will help you walk you through this pattern, but you can also use it for any other pattern that has a similar type of pleats. These were really common in the 1930s to give movement, and so the skirts would fit very slim, and then there would be some sort of pleat to help you walk, to let the skirt have a little bit more interest when you were moving. So it's kind of exciting. So today, to do the tutorial, I have printed out the E-pattern at half scale, 50%. So there's a front skirt, back skirt, and the inset. We really only need the front skirt and the inset for this tutorial, and you don't need to print them off half scale. I just did that so that I could show you without having to print the whole E-pattern, since I'm not actually going to be sewing in this tutorial. I'm just going to be showing you how to fold things so you can stitch it yourself. So what else you will need if you want to do this yourself? You're going to need some scissors, you're going to need a ruler, and whether or not you do it in paper first or you try it in your mock-up, you are going to want a ruler and a method of marking. Now, if you're making a mock-up, you can use any kind of marker that you want, but if you're doing this in your final fabric, don't use something that won't come out in the wash. So, a lot of times when I'm doing pleats, I want to do it with thread basting, and then I just pull my basting right out. But since the seam allowance on your pattern is 1/2 inch, you are going to be marking the edges and then also the pleat lines that you see on the skirt inset piece. I'll give you a close-up so you can see what I'm talking about, and then I'll show you how to pleat your pattern. Okay, I'm at my table and we have the pattern printed out. These are the instructions and the cover for the E-pattern. We have the inset, we have the front and the back skirt. I have a ruler and a method of marking, and I have some tape. So if we're going to be doing this, you're probably going to try it on your full-size pattern that you printed out or that you bought from my store. And it's going to be 100% scale, so it'll be twice as big as this. But for this visual, you really only need to see half the size because the same principle applies, and then I don't have to waste a bunch of paper. So what I want you to do is make sure that, like I said, if you do this on actual fabric, don't use a pen. Use something like thread marking, use another method would come out in the wash. So the close-up here of the pleat shows you that it's a really neat inverted double box pleat. So the way that you accomplish this may look a little bit challenging, but it's actually kind of easy once you get the hang of it. Now, don't feel bad if you still are confused, because I had to stare at it for quite a while, and I've done a lot of pleated skirts. I've marked the pieces as the original period piece was marked, which means that there were dots. There were no lines, there were no markings, there was none of this when the original pattern, that this was based on came out. So all of the labeling, all of the lines have been added for you to make sense. This is cut on the fold. This is the inset piece, so make sure that you have this cut double. We're going to show you on half, because it's the same principle for both sides. You really don't need the back skirt, so you can kind of ignore that. We're just going to be doing the inset piece. And on your pattern itself, you may notice that there's a very strange little notch right here. That's intentional. It was designed this way. I have snipped it here because I was experimenting. Yours will not be snipped when you start. Now, the most important thing when you do any new pattern is to look at the instructions. I put a lot of effort into the instructions just to make sure that you have what you need, and really it helps you walk through your piece. So really, during your mock-up phase, you should be looking at the instructions, especially for old and period things, to see how it went together. You'll see at the illustration here that it shows some clipping. So it says /G back skirt at the upper corner to prep for attaching the pleats. That means that you're going to snip in at this line right here to allow the pleats to attach to each other. So that's what I've done with my scissors. You don't want to go all the way to the line. Leave it back a little bit. It's better to do too little than too much. So check that out. I'll get a little closer so you can see what I'm talking about next. So this is where my clip is. I've gone all the way to the line. Like I said, don't go all the way to the line. Back it off a little bit, start at 1/4 from where the line is, and see how that behaves for you. So the first thing you do is clip it there. You're going to clip the point and turn in the upper edge between the zeros. So it looks like one of these got lost in translation. At the top of the line right there, originally there was a 0, but the top of the line is exactly the same place where the 0 was. Since I've done this half scale, that means that my seam allowance is 1/4 inch. So I'm going to draw 1/4 inch and connect those two lines. If you're doing this on your actual fabric, of course, you're not going to be using a pen. I'm going to keep saying it over and over again because I don't want it to be my fault that you marked it wrong. So just use your basting, whatever you need to know where your 1/2 inch seam allowance is. This is half scale, so it's 1/4. Yours will be 1/2 inch. Next, you're going to flip this under. If you've ever done a lapped seam, this is exactly the same method. Turn that under. Now your seam allowance is facing up towards the waist. This is cut on the double, so it will be difficult for you to turn this up because it will be an inverted V. What you're going to want to do is make a little snip here at center front and then press it up. Again, make sure you don't go all the way to the seam allowance or else you'll have some raveling. So leave a little bit, and especially if you're working in wool, it's a little more forgiving, so you may be able to steam it without putting all the way to the seam allowance. Okay, so after you've done that, you're going to baste it into place by hand, which means that you're just going to run basting to hold the seam allowance facing upwards. Back in the time period of the 1930s and earlier, they used a lot of basting, and that's something that we don't use as much now, but it really helps give a nice finished look to the garment. I backed it off again so that you can see we're going to now attach these two seams together. Now with all sewing, where you see the notches is where the pieces go together. And if they don't exactly match up, it might be the old pattern, but I think we got it as close as we could with a little bit of finessing. So again, I am using half size, so I'm going to be using 1/4 inch. I'm going to mark where my placement will be. And now I'm going to pretend that I've joined these two pieces together. And since I am taping, I'm just going to turn under one edge. If you were sewing this, you would put right sides together and then stitch, and you would be matching the notches. Now you can see here that it extends above that point. It's meant to do that. That's how it was in the time period. Don't worry about that. Where the one piece is longer underneath than the other, it's okay. So I'm going to tape it. Since I'm doing paper, of course, like I said, you're going to be stitching yours. And if you're doing a mock-up, you don't need to use tiny seam allowance. You can use wider basting. Like I'll use like 4.0 instead of 2.5 if I'm sewing a mock-up. That's your stitch length. Okay, once you have taped these together at your seam line or stitched it, it should look like this. It will be doubled, so this will be mirrored and this will be mirrored. Obviously this part is going to be longer than the skirt because it gets pleated in. You're going to make the first pleat, and to do that, you're going to match this line that's closest to the center front to the center front. If you haven't done it yet, make sure that you mark center front. You can do it with basting if you're doing it in your real one, or whatever method of marking you want. When you see this V here at the top, that's an indication that something needs to happen there, because we need the piece that matches to the skirt to have exactly that angle. So if there's a V, like there or like there, something's happening. What you're going to do is you're going to pleat it on that first line and bring it to center front, just like that. Then you're going to baste it all the way down by hand. And on the real one, you can see that there is a dot there, or maybe you can't see on this camera, but there are two dots. There's one up here and one here. You're going to top stitch from there to there, about 1/8 from the edge. Do that on both sides, and then you should have a really cool inverted box pleat at the front. That's what you want. Next step, you've got this interesting bit going on here, and this bit here. The part about these pleats that's interesting is that although the top is underneath here, the bottom looks like it lays on top of the lower part of the skirt. How you do that is you pleat it on this next line from center front, and you bring it to the line on the skirt here. And if you see that, then look at what we've got. Really neat box pleat going on like this. That's your pleat. There's going to be 2 of them, okay? You're going to top stitch from this dot down to the other dot, also 1/8 from the edge, and that will hold it in place and baste the rest of it. Okay, now I'm going to get in closer so you can see what's going on and see how the pleat is actually finished. So you might say, what do I do with this top bit here? If you remember, the first thing that we did was turn under that seam allowance. You can see it here. You're going to flip this to the back and you're going to put it right on top like that. That is how your pleats go. So now you can see all the seam allowances underneath facing up towards the waistline. You're going to top stitch 1/8 or as close as you can get to this line. That's going to secure those in place. So you will have top stitching here, you'll have top stitching here, you'll have top stitching here, and then you will have 2 lovely little box pleats that will be on the front of your skirt. This will all be hidden. You might need to ease this in a little bit. That's totally easy to do with wool. When you get down here to the corner, make sure you somehow finish this edge. Make sure it's not a raw edge right there. You might need to do a couple little whip stitches or something to make sure that your pleat is holding nicely. So that is how we pleat the skirt on the new pattern. And I think I called it the front skirt this whole time. This is the back skirt. The pleat is in the back. You can see in here, that's what it looks like when it's finished. 2 little pleats. The bottom's turned under, so you get a neat little point right there. And that is the cool part about this skirt. From the front, it's really nice like that. From the back, you've got these really interesting pleats. I hope you found this tutorial helpful for making your 1930s skirts, and make sure you follow me on Instagram at Wearing History. My website is wearinghistory.clothing for printed patterns, and Wearing History on Etsy for e-patterns. Thanks so much.